Good morning. My name is Nancy Rigdon, and I am from Randolph. I've been in this church about 3 years now, and I have a scripture reading for you this morning, and it's from John 18, verse 28 through John 19, verse 16. When the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor, by now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man? If he were not a criminal, they replied, we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." "But we have no right to execute anyone," they objected. This place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked. "Or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it that you have done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. "What is truth?" reported Pilate. With this, he went out again to the Jews and gathered there and said, "I find no basis for a charge against him, but it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at a time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews?" They shouted back, "No, not him. Give us Barabbas." Now Barabbas had taken part in an uprising. When Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged, the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they slapped him in the face. Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I have found no basis for a charge against him." When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify, crucify!" But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." The Jewish leaders insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law, he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize I have the power either to free you or to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be king opposes Caesar." When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at the place known as the Stone Pavement, which is Arabic, and Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about noon. "Here is your king," Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, take him away, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. "We have no king but Caesar," the chief priests answered. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus.
Well, we're continuing through John, and we're looking at John's account, as I said, of the crucifixion this week, next week, the week after that, leading up to Easter Sunday. And here we see, actually, it's his trial and crucifixion. Here we see his trial before Pilate. A lot of detail is given here, and it makes me wonder why. Wonder why, particularly because of this. John has told us in this book, John has told us in this gospel what the aim of this whole book that he's writing is. What is it he's trying to accomplish? He tells us just one chapter over, in chapter 20, verse 31. He says there that there were many things about Jesus that he could have written about. Books could have been written. Many, many books could have been written about Jesus. But he says, these are written. I have written what I have written, verse 31, that you may believe. I write what I wrote. I selected what I selected under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit for a specific purpose. Everything in here is supposed to lead you to believe, and not just to believe generally in some general sense in God or something. He has a very specific goal of what he wants us to believe. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. That's a high bar. I want you to see that's a high bar. He's writing this, wanting us to believe that wanting us to believe in Jesus and believe this specific thing about Jesus, that Jesus is the Messiah, which means God's King, the authority that God establishes over everyone, everywhere, all of time and history. That's Messiah, Son of God. In other words, he wants you not just to believe something that has no consequences for your life, but to believe something. He writes everything here so that you would believe something that if you really believe it will have consequences for every aspect of your life. That Jesus is the King who you bow to, surrender to, who you bow before him and say, Lord, command me. It's what you do with the Messiah. So everything John writes is to lead us to believe in this Jesus. And if that is so, here we come to this chapter, these verses that have just been read, and what a strange presentation of the King we have. You notice here that it's the kingship of Jesus that is being talked about all through here. That's what the charge is. That's what's constantly being argued about. Is Jesus a king? What kind of a king is he? And yet, and even he is presented before us as the king to look at in a very particular way. In 19 verse 5, and if you know the old King James, sometimes you hear things in King James and you can never hear them any other way. That's how this verse is for me. 19 verse 5, when Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them in the King James, "Behold the man." Behold the man. And in 19 verse 14, again, it's actually the same words in the King James. "Behold your king," Pilate said to the Jews. In other words, this is the section where the king that we are to believe in is presented. He is put forward. We're to look at him. Pilate says, look at him, behold him. And what a strange king he is. No political consultant writing a biography of a future presidential candidate would write anything like this in. John, what are you doing showing us this king? Think about it. Behold the king who didn't have any political power. He is brought in at the start of this before Pilate, the Roman governor, as a criminal. He's presented as a common criminal, it says in verse 30. Common criminal. He has, at the very least, even if he's not a criminal, been outmaneuvered by his enemies, it would seem. They bring him in, presenting him as a criminal, and then he clearly says, when Pilate says, "Are you a king?" Jesus says, "Was that your idea, Pilate, or did you get that from someone else?" I think what Jesus is saying there is, what kind of king are we talking about? The Jewish king or your idea, your Roman idea of king? What are you talking about, Pilate? And Pilate says, "Am I a Jew? Your people handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" And here's Jesus' response. "My kingdom is not of this world." Better translated like this: my kingdom is not from this world. That's what it literally is. Not from this world. My kingdom is not from this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders, but now my kingdom is from another place. Behold your king, no political power. He doesn't even have people who he's sending out to fight for him. Barabbas did. It says Barabbas, this other prisoner, had taken part in an uprising. He had fought, he had killed. Jesus says, I never fought anyone, and I won't even fight right now. His kingdom is from another place. He didn't form an army to wield political power. He didn't form a political action committee. That was not the primary focus of his kingdom. He did not, by political means or by physical force, compel anyone to believe at the tip of the sword. It comes from a different place. What's fascinating is, here's Jesus. Look, Pilate is standing in the place of all political power. He says in 19 verse 10, you understand I could kill you or let you go. All the power is with Pilate. But what does Jesus do? He doesn't claim any of it. What he does do, just a side point, is he does speak the truth in a particularly gutsy way, as Jesus always did. He says to Pilate, you say I'm a king, verse 37. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. In other words, he says to Pilate, you may have the political power, I have the truth. If you were wise, Pilate, you'd listen to me. But come on. We all know what really moves the world, don't we? Power. Pilate is very concerned with political power and the ability it gives him to get things done. Isn't that exactly the kind of power that men like Pilate desire and fear? The power, ultimate power to be able to do whatever you want, even to kill a man or let him free? And even if that's not your desire, isn't that what people want? Isn't that the kind of leader we want? One who will take care of us, defend us from our enemies, protect us, fight the people we want fought. And John here presents a king. What are you doing, John? A king that you want us to believe in and bow down to and surrender, who wielded no political power at all. Not just that, it gets worse. Behold the man, it says in 19 verse 5. Behold the king, it says in 19 verse 14. This is not only a king who wielded no political power, it's a king who had no physical attraction to draw us to him. Behold the man, behold the king. I've said it already. What Pilate is doing there, again, he's got a whole crowd that has brought Jesus in. They're all gathered. They all are crying for blood. And what Pilate does is set Jesus before the crowd as a kind of physical specimen for their appraisal. And Pilate does this because he is confident. He doesn't want to kill Jesus, but he does, and so he just wants the crowd to go away. He wants the problem to go away without it causing more problems for him. He doesn't think Jesus is guilty of anything. And so he puts Jesus before the crowd, says, behold the man, behold your king, look at him, this physical specimen, because Pilate is confident if they actually look at him at the state that he's in, they will say, this man is no threat at all. Who would want to follow him? How do we know that? Well, you can read throughout. Pilate says he doesn't want to crucify him, but think about what state Jesus is in when he is thrust before the crowd. The gospel writers don't linger on the physical cruelty of the crucifixion, and we're wise to follow their lead in that, not to linger. And yet John does give us a picture that helps us see what they saw when they saw Jesus in that moment. He gives it to us on purpose, not only because it's true, but because this is the man they beheld. Behold the man, behold the king. Not only no physical power, no political power, no physical attractiveness. Why? John tells us what was done to him. 19 verse 1. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. Now, putting this together with the other gospel accounts, The other gospel accounts say Jesus was flogged after he was sentenced to crucifixion. So it seems Jesus was flogged twice. Once here, second time before crucifixion. Well-attested historical documents. There were 3 kinds of flagellation, flogging, that were used in the Roman Empire. The first kind, the least severe kind, is probably the kind Jesus received here. It was called something like fustigatio. It's less severe, but a serious whipping. He would have been welted, bleeding. Later, in verse 16, when it says Pilate handed them over to be crucified, that was the more severe, the most severe kind of flogging. Verberatio was where the criminal, and it was only done, only done for crucifixion, because the whipping alone could just about kill, and often sometimes did kill, the prisoner. They were whipped by Roman soldiers until the soldiers were exhausted. They were whipped with whips, leather thongs with pieces of bone or lead or metal on the end. Jesus is flogged. Verse 2. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. Probably date palms. Middle Eastern date palms have 3-inch long thorns. And you can actually Google it. I did this week. Date palms. And you will see articles now about treating date palm puncture wounds. Because the thorns tend to break off and cause infection. They're very sharp. Crown of thorns was made and put on his head, so he is bleeding, probably from the head as well. Still, verse 2, they clothed him in a purple robe. That's adding insult to injury. Purple is the color of royalty. He is beating, probably half naked, and they put the robe on him to insult him, to demonstrate that he is no king at all. Then it says in verse 3, and they went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews," and they slapped him in the face. It's literally, they hit him with their hands. And these are Roman soldiers who are hardened and brutal. And they beat him. 700 years before this, the prophet Isaiah spoke of the servant who would come, the servant of the Lord, and he spoke in the voice of the servant, put these words in his mouth, and they relate to this incident. Isaiah 50, verses 5 to 7. Listen to, this is inspired scripture, prophetic scripture, hearing as though from Jesus' perspective, indeed from Jesus' perspective, what he endured here. Isaiah 50, verse 5 and 7. The sovereign Lord has opened my ears. I have not been rebellious. I have not turned away. I offered my back to those who beat me, my cheeks to those who pulled out my beard. I did not hide my face from mocking and spitting. Because the sovereign Lord helps me, I will not be disgraced. Therefore I have set my face like flint, and I know I will not be put to shame. This is the man who is thrust before the crowd, and Pilate says, "Behold your king." Can you hear the mocking tone then in his voice? Pilate is saying, you want us to take this guy seriously? Who follows a man like this? As Isaiah says just a couple of chapters later of the Messiah, he had no beauty or majesty that would attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of sorrows and familiar with pain. Who wants to follow that guy? Now remember, John, here's our king. You want us to believe in him. No political power. He wielded none as king. No physical attractiveness. And don't we know that what people want and are so drawn to easily is physical attractiveness? People respond to, don't we? We all do in some level. Charisma, beauty, attractiveness. I read an article this last weekend that was in the New York Times about social media influencers, Instagram influencers. It's in the New York Times saying the new religion of online Instagram influencers. social media influencers who build their advice, and part of the power of their advice that's sometimes taken as religious, with religious type authority, is the beauty of the pictures of themselves they present and their perfect seeming life that just draws people to them. And you think, well, if I could be close to them, I could be maybe like that. We're drawn to this kind of charisma and beauty and strength and power. But behold the man. How do you Instagram this? He's a bloody mess. John wants us to believe that Jesus is king, but what a strange presentation. A king who doesn't wield political power is presented here without any draw of physical attraction. Is that what people will want? Maybe not. But John is saying it's what we need, and maybe we, if we think about it for a moment, realize that we do desire at least something different than just power and beauty, physical attractiveness. Maybe, what if, at this time, all the political turmoil that we have been through as a nation has shown some of us the limits of what politics can fix in the hurting, broken, and corrupted soul of America. Maybe just getting political power and the increasingly ugly struggle for it is not going to fix everything. Maybe we need a better way. Maybe in this long time of the pandemic, we're learning the limit of ourselves and how much we can actually live off online personalities or maintain the illusion that we have things together. None of us do. Maybe we need something better than politics and appearances, like a kingdom that is breaking into this world from somewhere else, that suddenly breaks open the perspective so that we can see something bigger and better that speaks to more fundamental issues of the human soul. What if we need good news from someplace else? And what if Jesus Christ, behold the man, is bringing it? In that same article, it's called "The Empty Religion of the Empty Religions of Instagram." This woman, Lee Nash, who says she's a millennial nun. Do you know what a nun is? According to Pew Research, I don't know what the last word of their organization is. They research religious trends in America. Nuns among millennials are 22%. Almost a quarter of millennials say, I have no religious affiliation. I don't associate with any religion at all. That number has grown almost 10% in 10 years. This woman says, I'm a nun. I'm a millennial nun. I don't believe in religion. I have trouble with religion. I haven't been to church for a long time. But she also writes in this article, this is what she writes. She wrote, I have hardly prayed to God since I was a teenager, but the pandemic has cracked open inside me a profound yearning for reverence, humility, and awe. She says, I have an overdraft on my outrage account. I want moral authority from someone who isn't selling a product or calling out her enemies on social media. She writes, maybe we actually need to go to something like church. Her words. Well, if someone was to come looking, what would we give them? I hope not a political rally or a pep talk with upbeat advice on how to live your best life. What we must give is what John gives. Jesus. Behold the man. So briefly, let me give you 3 reasons from this text why you should trust him. Why you should bow before him. Why you should surrender everything to him. 3 reasons, briefly. 1, Jesus will tell you the truth. John 18:37, isn't that what he says? He says, you say that I'm a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. Jesus is saying, as John says throughout, that as he speaks to us even now through his living word, he will deal with you straight. He will level with you. He will comfort you and you can trust him, and he will challenge you and you should listen. But he won't spin you. He won't patronize you. And he also won't just affirm you in whatever you're doing. He says to Pilate, everyone on the side of truth listens to me. In other words, he says, look, Pilate. He says, look, Justin. He says, look to all of us. Listen, if it's not that I'm going to come and say, your truth, I affirm you in your truth. He says, listen, I will tell you the truth, and you should listen to me. But when you do, you know that I'm leveling with you. I'm not selling you anything. That one reason to trust Jesus is that he will actually tell us the truth. And we know that even when he speaks to us hard truths, he does so with sympathy and kindness. Look at him. He doesn't, behold the man. He has felt the full effects of the brutality of this world, and he did it in order to save us. Even when he speaks to us the hardest truths, he does it not as someone who is above us, but as someone who has come down right alongside us and can sympathize with us even in our weakness. You should trust him because he'll tell you the truth, number one. Number two, because Jesus really is the king. He really is. In John, Pilate says in 19 verse 10, you refuse to speak to me, don't you realize I have the power either to free you or to crucify you? Right? Pilate pulls a power trip. He says, look, I could kill you or I could set you free. You're not going to talk to me? And this is what Jesus says. Jesus answered, you would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin. He is saying, Pilate, whatever power you have has been given to you for a limited amount of time. It's not yours forever. It's yours for now. It's been given to you from above by my Father, who is making me king, ultimately. It's limited. A rather ridiculous illustration of that, perhaps, is babysitters at our house. We have kids now that are old enough that they don't really need babysitters as much anymore, and we have in-laws downstairs. It's a nice period to be in. But in the past, we've had babysitters. We've had people in this room babysit for us. And when they come, they're right in this pew, right here, both of them. It's when the babysitters have come, we say to our kids, now you have to listen to them. This sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, as they know. You need to listen to the babysitter. They have authority. We back them up. We're telling you that Aaron or Rebecca are in charge, and you need to listen to them while we are gone. We've given them authority. But Aaron and Rebecca are good babysitters. We don't have to worry about this. But I think they both know that their authority is limited. These are still our kids and our house. Don't give them a haircut. Right? Don't paint the living room and change the furniture. You have a limited scope of authority for a limited amount of time, which they're grateful for because we'll come back and take over. It's a limited scope. Do you see what Jesus is saying to Pilate, who represents Rome, the greatest power in the world? Jesus is saying, this is God's world and I am God's son. For God's purposes, he has given you responsibility for a limited amount of time to do even this thing that he will allow for his greater purposes. But listen, Pilate, the people who plotted and brought me here will answer for it, and you will too. They have the greater sin. You have a sin as well because you're not in control. Jesus is saying, my Father is. And what is it that God is doing? He is presenting Jesus as king. And when Jesus dies, God will raise him up from the dead, exalt him to the highest place where Jesus reigns right now, and the day is coming when every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. He really is king. And Pilate will stand and answer for what he did on that day. And here is the warning to us, so will we. For every area of responsibility we have. Why should you trust him now? Because he is king. He'll tell you the truth. He really is the king. And if you think about standing and giving an account for your life, for every area of responsibility you have, every bit of power you've got over your money, over your relationships, over your words, you think of giving account for what you have done with that, the only hope that I have and that you will have on that day is that the King himself will give you his pardon. Why should you trust him? He'll tell you the truth. He really is King. And the last one, more briefly as we go to communion, is just this. You should trust him because Jesus didn't die for himself. If Pilate has limited authority, why was he allowed to use it for this horrible result, the death of Jesus? See, somehow, though Pilate is responsible, though he has sinned here, even this is not outside the scope of God's rule or surprise for God's eternal plan. It didn't catch him off guard, and yet Jesus is still handed over in this moment. It says Pilate hands him over to be crucified. Why? Why does he go? Why the sham trial, the mocking, the beating, the flayed back, the judgment, the crucifixion? It can only be because Jesus the King didn't die for himself. He didn't die for his sins. He didn't die for his salvation. He had no need of it. He died for the Father in loving obedience, and he died for you and I, for any who will receive him. John 13, verse 2 says, having loved his own who are in the world, he loved them to the end. This is the end. For your forgiveness, salvation, cleansing. Behold the King. Behold him so that you might believe, and by believing have life, and life everlasting in his name. As we come now to the communion table, this is the table where we remember that Jesus' body was broken and his blood was shed for us. So I want to give us a moment to prepare for this table. By coming and taking the bread and the cup, what we are saying is this. Paul says, when you take this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim something. You say something by taking it. You proclaim, he says, the Lord's death until he comes. And you proclaim your part in it. In other words, by taking this bread and taking this cup, as we come forward to take it, we are saying, Jesus, command me. And we are saying, Jesus, forgive and save me. So as we prepare to come to this table, it is good for us to take a few moments and examine our hearts and say, Lord, is there any area that we need to lay down before you? Where are the areas that we need your forgiveness? And to always, always receive, as we ask for, God's forgiving grace, for how great is his love for us.